Thanks for joining us again. And today we're doing something we should have done a long time ago. Bryce, who's joining us today, was one of the reasons why the DNA company exists. Originally, I'm going to take you back. We were way back. Some of you have met with Horace. Some of you have talked to Horace at different conferences and such. And me and Horace were fiddling around trying to build supplements and trying to solve our own problems. And then we went to see Bryce because of all the people I've ever spoken to about what you should be taking. And this is so important because you can go to a lot of people, they'll tell you what you got. They'll tell you, here's the diagnosis, but what do you do about it? That's where we get lost, right? And in knowing Bryce, I learned that what's in his head is incredible and everybody needs to hear it. And that's where we got to, well, supplements aren't enough. We need to personalize things. We need to make things, tailored to the individual. And that's where we got to, well, we need to understand DNA, because how do we tailor stuff if you don't know the blueprint? And the blueprint is your genomic instruction manual. Your DNA is telling your cells what to do. If you can hear that language and understand what those instructions are, you know what's going on. And so from that, the DNA Code was born. Bryce has been literally globetrotting his whole life, going to the best ingredient manufacturers, supplement manufacturers, trying to understand how things can get made better. On behalf of whether they're local manufacturers or even in terms of the media. And he's learned what actually works. And the thing that we recently spoke about was immunity, the thing that all of us are now worried about. There's so much noise about what to do. There's so much noise about, here's the problem. You know what the problem is. That's clear. What do you do about it? There's a medical route where you rely on your practitioner, your doctor, to tell you, here's what you do, and we know what that is. But maybe there's more, right? And not negating that whether you should do that or not, that's a whole other 2-hour conversation. What else can you do? Because that's where all the noise is, right? That's where I don't know what's right, what's wrong. So Bryce, thank you for joining us. And I think you're going to sort of clear a lot of mud today.
My honor, my pleasure. Circa 2017, I'll never forget that day you and Hars came into my practice and we first met and started noodling this concept. And as they say, the rest is history. But I appreciate you and your mind as a connector and biohacker extraordinaire now. I mean, you've come a long way yourself, and you just never stop learning. And I really appreciate that about you. And it's wonderful to finally join you on your podcast.
Yeah, thank you. It's impact is what drives it, because when you see results, there's one thing to do what I used to do in my past life and make money, right? Which is, if you could do that, there's a lot of ways to do that, but there's no impact. There's no gain other than numbers, which don't mean much after you have enough. Everything's paid for, right? It's just a game. But when you start to see lives changed, take myself, for example. What did you do for me? Eczema gone, psoriasis gone, migraines gone, acid reflux gone, depression gone. It's all gone. I used to, every winter season, from the time I could remember until about 4 years ago, be sick in bed for 10 days to 2 weeks, 2 to 3 times per season. And I remember what you told me, because I came to you saying why. I had a migraine and a flu at the same time. You said it's not about getting sick. That's just exposure. You're going to get sick. It's about how sick you're going to get and how fast you recover. That's health. You can get sick every week. And now, literally now, today, I get a tingle in my throat. I spray a couple of magic potions you tell me about. And a few hours later, it's gone. I haven't been sick in 3 years.
So, listen, to that end, a couple of important things to circle back on. That's a lot right there. This is no miracle medicine. I think that's what you're alluding to. This is getting the body to do what it already does on its own, but much better. That is the art and science behind natural medicine at large. But you said something that hit a chord with me as well, and that's insofar as financial, whether it's earning, investment. We have this lingo that we like to promote within natural medicine. These are not my words. I don't know whose quote this was, but ultimately it's going to always be true, forever be true. And that is, your health is your most important investment. It is never an expense. You get one body, one life, and if you don't support health, then all of that's gone. So good for you to want to make the change. Good for you to, sort of learn about, all these sort of little non-miracles, but pretty powerful things found within the world of natural medicine. And, often these are born empirically, over the ages. through wisdom and storytelling. And, most of them aren't so new. They're reborn, perhaps validated scientifically, but, they're often traditional. Either Ayurveda or they are traditional Chinese medicine, something that, the East's been doing a long time that we finally adopt into the Western, more scientific model, if you will. But yeah, listen, 20 plus years in clinical practice, I can't say a day goes by where I don't see some form of incredible recovery. It's not me. It's the individual's ability to ultimately reactivate, whether it's their immune system, we'll talk about that a little bit more today, or their detoxification, or to manage, as we say in the DNA company, right? You can't change your genes, but you can manage genetic expression through triggering slight, changes in the epigenetics, and you do that by turnkey with the right ingredients. That's really what it's all about.
Yeah, and I think when you say that, people think of this stuff as not rooted in science or not scientifically valid, it just hasn't been through a very specific scientific process. Science, what is science? There's a hypothesis, you then observe something, and when it works, it's true, right? And when somebody has observed something for 1,000 years working, it hasn't gone through a very specific process that a very specific entity needs, but it's still proven to be true.
Right. So this is, of course, not placebo control, randomized clinical trials or multi-sites, as you're alluding to. But science does revere N of one, multiple N of one over time, and that's frankly the richness of what the DNA company sits on. You're N of one, I'm N of one. We know what our genetics are. We've got thousands and thousands of N of ones, and we've seen repeatedly very specific things being done done for these individuals. And over time, the same kinds of patterns evolve and express. So N of one over time is a very, very, very powerful and also scientifically validated form of proving through, like you said, stuff that's otherwise perhaps traditional or empirically derived.
And that's where, so this whole sort of wave of personalized medicine that's supposed to come, and you look at articles. I actually just bought National Geographic. Did you know that National Geographic is $18 now? I thought it was like $3 or $4. I picked it up while I was grocery shopping, and I was like, that's got to be a mistake. I had no idea that's what magazines cost because I haven't bought one in years. But anyways, it was all about the future of medicine. And they're talking about personalized medicine. But when you look at what they refer to as personalized medicine, it's not that personal. They're taking the maximum you can take out of this thing we have that is the most personal thing, our DNA, and still bucketing into how do I make it one size fits all, right? Meaning that the only thing that they're drawing out of it are the direct connect genetic conditions, sickle cell, the conditions that there's a switch that was turned on and off. So personalized medicine isn't truly about personalizing medicine to you. It's about what medicine can I make that's personalized, meaning that every person needs every problem solved at a personalized level. Not only this 2% of problems can be personalized, right? And that's the challenge that we've been having. And it's through that N of one work, like you said, that, you were deeply involved in, where we said the answer isn't about mass. It isn't about making one size fits all. It's that if you go N of one, you can start to find these profiles of the trends. And you can start to see that there aren't an infinite number of hormonal cascades. There's 5 or 6. And there aren't an infinite number of cardiovascular cascades. There's a few. And now all of a sudden you can get personalized, not one pill that works for one problem, but maybe it's 4 or 5 different solutions. And now 100% of people get their problems resolved. Right? And that's part of the work you helped with us. And it was amazing. But now, sorry, go ahead.
Just going to say to that end, one of the things that blew my mind, just reminded me, and by the way, I can't believe National Geographic is that expensive. I had some of my most incredible learnings through that publication. My mother ordered it to our home growing up, followed a lot of the work, and he was often, featured, and that was Dr. Stephen Jay Gould, evolutionary biologist. In fact, one of the individuals who, really impressioned upon me the whole idea of evolutionary biology and, of course, the application to biological medicine. Growing up, it's funny you mentioned National Geographic. So what blew my mind, one of our many, many findings was, maybe after a year or two studying under Dr. Mansour Mohammed, of course, who's our genomics literally the inventor of these pathways that we've been studying for all these years. was determining that individuals who are women in particular, particularly younger women, who have predispositions genetically or through their genomic pathways to be strongly estrogenized or estrogen dominant, and then ultimately downstream, potentially even estrotoxic, a lot of these individuals. And the combination of those two things, we saw a lot of Lyme disease through P3 Health, before that recently actually evolved into VenMed here in Toronto. But one thing, and one thing only, that we would do in these cases that seemed to miraculously recover these individuals was removing them from either birth control pills and or hormones, replacement therapy, which was either synthetic or natural, didn't matter. You take that estrogen hypertoxicity away from these individuals and the Lyme disease disappears. I guess to that end, what I'm saying is that sometimes it's more about what you take away, the burden on the individual, even more so than it is ultimately trying to give them something.
Yeah.
And so, and we've discovered a lot of that, and when we talk about toxins, we're not just talking about these ethereal, industrial, produced pollutants in the atmosphere. We're talking about those endogenous, self-made toxins. We all make toxins. Often it's how well do we clear them, and solving for that, in particular, in this case, removing the offending agent, health ensues, right? I mean, right. So that's just, one of many findings. And actually that applies to the immune system as well. One thing that really concerns me, in fact, is this whole trend that's gone on over the last couple of years over the pandemic, and that is the lack of exposure of the offending agent. This is paradoxical, not so simple. So this discussion involves understanding the innate immune system, and that part of which we learn over time, the learned immune system, kind of like a muscle. If you don't work out your muscles, you don't flex your muscles or lift weights. We're meant to push, pull, jump, squat, lift, and press. Our immune system's meant to engage in different ways, right. Cytokine expression with the outside and different microbes and viruses. If it doesn't do that, it starts to forget. And by analogy of working out, it gets lazy. And that's concerning to me, what I mean? I don't know about you, but I myself have been very, because of what we've been doing, avoidance techniques and so forth. I haven't been nearly as sick as, I used to be in the past. And I don't want to be sick, but this is now full circle to a comment you made earlier. The epitome of health is not whether you get ill. It's how quickly and effectively you recover from that illness. And so when I would get ill, colds or flus or whatever they may be, it was high fever, but fast and furious, couple of days, nurture myself back to health, and then boom, I'm right back to it. That's keeping a healthy immune system. Of course, you don't want superimposed bacterial infections or complications that run out weeks on end, but not getting sick is a problem too.
I remember when one of my kids was sick earlier on. He got pretty sick. And first time I experienced it, right? And your comment to me was good. He's building his immune system. That's what needs to happen right now, right? And your comment about, intervention with what's going on right now, and the sort of us leaning towards this single solution, this vaccine solution, right? And versus innate immunity. And we didn't know early on what we were dealing with. And so there was a sort of, free for all in terms of let's figure this out, and we got driven towards a vaccine, which was working for some people. But then you look at other viral infections. This is the first time we've ever used a vaccine on somebody that's sick, meaning that if you have measles or you have, you have it, now deal with your innate immunity buildup, right? You can get something to prevent, or you can get but it's never been offered as sort of a treatment. Or if somebody got something, now ride the wave and let's see what happens, and you're going to get better. There's other support that can be provided, but not vaccination or inoculation against that virus. This is the first time we're ever seeing that.
It's the first time, and this is my biggest, my frustration with what we're doing and how we're proceeding forward right now, and that is the lack of attention and or acceptance that's given to natural immunity. In fact, it's not even acknowledged in many circles in many countries. The vaccine essentially deals with, so far, the ones that are out there, deals with a single protein on the outside of that virus. It's the spike protein we all hear about in the news. Natural immunity engages with dozens of others outside the actual cell surface, plus a lot of internal cell components, nuclear components. So when you've had COVID, this is really where my frustration lies. When you've had COVID, you have natural immunity. Well, two things. A, my strongest advice is to really, really consider whether or not, if you haven't already gotten it, a vaccine is healthy. I don't believe it is. I don't believe it's doing anything except maybe hyperactivating your immune system at that point in time. We know natural immunity is robust. We know it lasts a very long time. And the way I would, advise a patient is by first testing for their T cells. And that's easily doable. You can have a blood, test that determines whether or not you even had COVID, 2 years ago, because your immune system is robust and it's long lasting and your T cells remember. That's the learned component. But the other thing is that we're not acknowledging it insofar as it being something that you would accept into these passports. This is infuriating to me because, frankly, what the literature tells us, what we've learned is that natural immunity is stronger and longer lasting in individuals who have complete immune systems. And what I mean by that is they're not immune compromised and they don't have immune dysfunction. So you can hyperactivate the immune system and you can confuse it. And then when it gets confused, we have all kinds of problems, well beyond what we've come to learn about, which like hyperclotting events, for example, or neurological issues. I don't know if actually you saw recently in the publication Science about how they've looked at these cohorts, military particularly, but high association between Epstein-Barr, the virus that causes mononucleosis. Many of us have it circulating in us. We don't necessarily remember getting mono, the sleeping or kissing disease, nor do we have fibromyalgia, highly suspected by a lot of functional medicine practitioners to, when it reactivates, cause this, pigeonhole disease. But in the Science article, the Science publication recently, what they determined was multiple sclerosis seems to be highly correlated with the expression or re-expression of Epstein-Barr virus. So that's an example of a confused immune system. And actually, frankly, that's exactly really where I've taken a focus in my clinical practice is honing in to the immune system, to the individual, that N of one, understanding their genetics through the DNA company and the genomic pathways, because again, hormones play a role, methylation plays a role, detoxification plays a role, and then really doing a deep dive into their cytokines. These are hormones that ultimately activate the inflammatory or anti-inflammatory systems and tells the immune system, whether it's frontline or for that matter the learned back end immune system, what to do at any given time, particularly the front end. And we should maybe talk about that and how natural medicine, nutraceuticals, ingredients that we use are really helping the immune system. You can in fact boost the immune system. You don't always want to, but you can. And then with all of that information, choosing the most appropriate nutraceuticals to not always boost, but often modulate. I think we have to redefine some of these terms in functional medicine and even biohacking world. It's not always about boosting. Sometimes it's about rejuvenating or modulating. And when you don't want to boost an unhealthy rogue cell like cancer or some deadened, near senescent immune cell, because that's just boosting an unhealthy production. We want to invite autophagy. We talk a lot about that in biohacking world and functional medicine. We want to invite senescence at the right time of the cell cycle, apoptosis, these things. If the cell's on its way out, let it die off. And that's the whole point behind some of these, protocols like intermittent fasting or even certain supplements you can take. But when you understand their genomics and you understand their cytokine profile, those are two very powerful tools. One will never change. Mom and dad dealt the cards there. Epigenetically, you can manage them, as we talked about. That's the whole beauty of what we focus on, the DNA company. But if you understand lifetime cytokine performance, sometimes an immune system can have a hyperactivated pro-inflammatory sequence. Some of the family, like interleukin 6, for example, is notorious for elevation in the Epstein-Barr virus re-expression we just alluded to, and fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, for example. Or you could have a depression in interleukin 10. That's an anti-inflammatory cytokine. So if we find this sort of lifetime fingerprint in my clinical practice, I will determine herbs that are best to bring up an underactive component of the immune system, or maybe even bring down a part of that. And again, to your point, this is tempering or balancing the immune system. You don't want to get a vaccine when you're sick. You don't want to get a vaccine when your immune system is imbalanced. And most of North America who's listening to this podcast have imbalanced immune systems. And again, we can talk about this, but it often starts from lifestyle, diet, nutrition, state of mind, what there are maybe potentially deficiencies, but more than deficiencies, because we're not always trying to resolve vitamin D deficiency or a third world country vitamin C deficiency. Those are certainly more rare, not vitamin D. That's very common. But often what we're trying to do is engage the immune system by adding some ingredients or life hacks to up or down regulate imbalanced cytokines when it comes to the immune system. It's quite frequently what we're doing.
So even just to use the words immune system, it's people consider that to be that is the sort of the limit of what we're looking at. But you're saying even there's so many levels of personalization to understand before even recommending. You could be general, and I'm sure there's things you could recommend that everybody can take, but there's ways to get very specific in terms of where you're at, mapping things out. It's like getting blood work done, understanding your numbers for cholesterol, et cetera, then knowing how to act. So that first step, we don't really do. You don't really hear much about people mapping out their immunity and then knowing specific for themselves what action plan they need.
Absolutely. Not everyone has to or maybe even necessarily wants to, but you absolutely can. And when you do, you're more empowered. Just like when you have your genetic information, you're certainly more empowered to know how to, it's the instruction manual to help you, guide, who's going to drive without GPS these days? Who would have driven without a map? 20, 30 years ago. So it's incredibly empowering. Unless you want to just sort of blindly go through life and not necessarily know. There's things everyone should do. We can talk about those too. But when you're empowered, again, N of one, understanding your genomics, understanding some of this lifetime biochemistry, you're certainly able to, build protocols, certainly immune protocols that will, in the face of COVID or most other viruses and bacteria. We talked about Epstein-Barr virus, right? And there's a cytomegalovirus or herpes simplex family. In fact, a lot of scientists, immunologists, epidemiologists now understand that these three and some other viruses are really one of the number one causes of cancer reactivation. So once again, the foundation of the immune system's faulty and or not guided and or you're blindly navigating through life. And that's predisposing you to the big C, cancer. Knowing your numbers is really important. So when you go to your family doctor and they do a white blood cell count, it's not just to know how many troops you have within your army. It's to really pick it apart and understand, what are the leukocytes or the neutrophils or the eosinophils, the basophils, what are they all doing? And what are their counts individually? But it doesn't stop there. There are hormones that dictate what those things should be doing. And there's also, and I said I'd bring this up eventually, and it does fit well here. And that is that when we talk about boosting, whether we're using echinacea or astragalus or Panax ginseng or whatever we're using, we're often what we're talking with. You get a lot of naysayers out there. People say, "Oh, you can't boost your immune system." There's a time and a place where you want to, but what we're talking about is frontline immune defense. We're talking about the innate. You're born with this component, these different cells, but the one that is probably most important is the natural killer cell. And if you're born in our era, we're very familiar with the game Pac-Man. We used to have to pay 25 cents to play it in the local convenience store, right? This is what we want to think about these cells like Pac-Man. They don't care what's ahead of them. As long as they're supercharged, they can eat a ghost or some rogue cell. But they're just munching away at anything they encounter that they know is otherwise foreign, like a virus or a bacteria or a cancer cell. We all have cancer cells moving through our system. Here's another tip, by the way, for the listeners. We all have a certain amount of cancer cells. I just said it. But when those cancer cells get rogue, embed themselves into tissue or not, your environment, your internal, your microbiome or your genome is faulty or whatever the situations might be, cancer can flourish. If your immune system's highly, active, robust, and you're healthy, you'll manage those cancer cells and you won't succumb to cancer. But learning and knowing your numbers is really helpful. And so what are those besides cytokines or natural killer cell activity or numbers? Circulating tumor cells. This is a test that's widely available. People don't know about it. So there's a baseline, and there's certainly what is otherwise normal, just like what's a normal white blood cell count, what's a normal circulating tumor cell count. There's a normal level. When you exceed that, now is probably the time you want to get in front of an oncologist and have some MRIs or contrast or CT. So is the point, knowing your numbers and understanding them. And circulating tumor cells, among others, there's antigens and other types of cancer cells that you can know the numbers about. But certainly it's appreciating where you're at in terms of an immune dysfunction or imbalance. We know this as Th1, Th2, like a teeter-totter, modulation. And some of us are Th1 dominant, some of us are Th2 dominant. To work on that, immunological balance is very helpful to stay away from, a lot of these reactivating viruses, for example.
And that's one thing that I've learned from you and Mansoor and other people on the team, is that when we dive into genetics, we kind of find the holes that need to be plugged, and that's what creates that balance. So it isn't about treating something necessarily. It's about you can get ahead if you know exactly where you're suboptimal, you're not doing as well. That's where you focus. It's not a disease, it's not a condition. You just don't do that job well. So let's make it better. And the same is true for what you discussed. And you mentioned things like echinacea, ginseng, and there's people, when they hear words like that, start to think about foo-foo science and grandma's medicine, and that's not healing power. That's just supplement sales and marketing. But you're one of the few people that has gone out there and actually participated in clinical research about this type of stuff. And in fact, I know you go to Europe and Asia and all over the place to visit these manufacturers. There's products that you've looked at that even within the world of, COVID and coronaviruses, people are now doing the research, that scientific validation, which is what prevents people from saying this stuff works. They're doing it now. And you actually have evidence of that stuff.
Yeah, there's so much. Well, to start off with, I'm all about, as you are and the team is, about clinical evidence, variation of that level that we can appreciate. Our criteria is quite strict, but when it comes to natural health products, and depending on what country you're residing in, and what qualifies there, to be sold to the public, that varies as well. But here in Canada, where we're talking, where we're doing the podcast from, we have some of the strictest regulations around natural health products, certainly at retail as well. So I'm all about the ingredient, not the brand, right? And it's about understanding, where the ingredient, where the active comes from, how is extracted, what literal DNA it grew from in terms of the seed to plant and then farm to finish. And so, just to use that as an example, there's all kinds of echinaceas, Pellida, Angustifolia, Purpurea. This goes back many thousands of years that echinacea has been used by indigenous people in Canada and the US. And again, empirically, they saw this, it was called snake root. They saw that this would help with snake bites and, people that had flus and sicknesses and all kinds of things. Back then, it was almost maybe even more of a panacea, but then science can distill down what some of these ingredients might work best from. Now, so there's all these different types of echinacea, and there's different DNA that suggests, this will grow a better, more robust echinacea. And then there's extraction processes, distillation, and concentrations. So having been through, there's some great stuff that comes out of Italy. There really is a really wonderful echinacea, Angustifolia, that uses they use the root and some of the aerial component. But the stuff that's now coming out of Switzerland, that uses an Echinacea purpurea, the aerial components, the flower, the head itself, and the root, fresh pressed. So the extract is live, fresh, and distilled, not heated, not dried and encapsulated in powder form, but fresh in liquid tincture form. And this extract has over 30 human clinical trials on it for cold and flu. In fact, I mentioned Health Canada. Health Canada, this is the only product, not even vitamin C or anything else gets this claim. And Health Canada's approved claim for sale of this Echinacea purpurea tincture and or even a tablet form as treats and prevents colds and flu. That's saying a lot. Yeah. And it's a lot to do. They think of the mechanism. By the way, I mentioned 30 clinical trials on colds and flu, treats and prevents. Most recently, actually, a really well done trial, 120 people, not placebo controlled, but there was a control group in place. Took this echinacea form, and the numbers, the output was it helped to prevent and treat, shorten the duration and prevent COVID. Oh, wow. That's now. Yeah, it's under review for publication. It's been done. This part of the study didn't actually it wasn't this part I'm about to mention wasn't statistically relevant, but because the numbers were too small. But in the control group, I believe it was 2 or 3 people went to the hospital In the echinacea group, no one went to the hospital of the people that ended up with COVID. But there are far more statistically
That's
significant.
phenomenal. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
So
yeah.
ingredients like that, I mean, when we appreciate cellular, mechanics and biology and the genetics, and you put all that stuff together, I think, and you and I are doing a project on this right now, live, actively. I think we've heard the term inflammation. It's a medical buzz term of the day for a good reason. It's the underlying cause of most disease at the cellular level. But cellular inflammation, understanding how to manage that, is going to directly and indirectly help to manage immune system function. And so what I mean by that is top down. So looking at protecting mitochondrial function, which is the organelle inside all of our cells, trillions of cells concentrated in the brain and the heart, that make energy for us, currency of energy, ATP. So it makes energy. So protecting the mitochondria, duplicating it, and then increasing its output, because that's the fuel. That's the energy that drives everything. Our thoughts, our circulation, our immune system. If the mitochondria within your natural killer cells is dysfunctional, how's it going to act like Pac-Man and eat anything up? So working top down, supporting the internal mechanisms of your cells, like the mitochondria, and then downstream, which we've learned through the DNA company, detoxification and inflammation. Like, how do we manage all of that in one? And as you know, something I reported back to you recently, when we looked at a bunch of numbers, what did we see? That were actually proving out exactly where we should be, and that's supporting methylation, inflammation, that's almost synonymous, as we've learned from Dr. Mansour, detoxification, and energy output. So this is an exciting project, CELLF.com. Listeners can go there and actually sign up, at least enroll for an active marketing research project that we're undergoing using, and this is now where we get to talk about the ingredients again, combination of ubiquinol, PQQ or pyrroloquinol, that's going to support mitochondrial division, and NMN. Whether you follow the work of Dr. David Sinclair or Charles Brenner, David's a lot more for nicotinamide mononucleotide, and Dr. Brenner's a lot more for Niagen, which is the nicotinamide riboside, but they're both precursors to NAD. Nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, which supports DNA replication, energy production, mitochondrial function, et cetera. So we're using those ingredients, some of the best-in-class curcumin, and some of the best-in-class detoxifying or supporting of detoxification, glutathione. And so let me tell you, glutathione is a $500 million industry in North America, and probably 80% doesn't work. You can PubMed this. Glutathione, this is for detoxification, supports how we eliminate all kinds of different things, as you know, whether it's precursors to glutathione, or it's glutathione itself in a reduced form or liposomal form. About 80%, some people say, some researchers say more than that, 90% doesn't work. It doesn't work. Either it's format or it's just sitting outside of the cell. If you can get glutathione into the cell beyond homeostasis, is how much your cell's producing on its own intracellularly, now you're in business. And so we're using in this project something called gamma glutamylcysteine, or GGC. Like, this is a very new form of glutathione that has been proven in multiple human clinical trials to get intracellular beyond homeostasis, therefore has been proven to upregulate intracellular glutathione within 90 minutes. By the way, for sports enthusiasts, that translates to speedy recovery, rapid recovery, and a down regulation of too much inflammation. So full circle again, just knowing where the ingredients come from, the evidence behind them, structure function claims, and of course purity, transparency, traceability, and environmental sustainability. All of those are part of our criteria and always have been at the DNA company in terms of what we manufacture.
So when you went through and you created Self, and this was an awesome project, it's kind of started off with something on the side where we realized that, like you said, disease is rooted in inflammation. Nobody argues that. Primary care MD down to biohacker, everybody agrees with that. What is inflammation rooted in? That's where the questions weren't being asked, because the tools weren't available. We just know that you get inflamed, it's going to cause some kind of issue, and then you get some kind of disease. Just depends where you got the inflammation. So we've learned through genetics that we can sort of look into the future and see what inflammation is coming. because we can look at two things. Where are you cellularly suboptimal? Like, endothelial isn't doing the best, as an example. And then what loads would cause you to get inflamed? Environmental, nutrition, lifestyle load, something like cardiovascular exercise, which is counterintuitive to say it could hurt you, but for some people can, right? So now, fast forward, we've understood that regardless of genetics, this is the one thing that the hub that all the spokes come out of, right? And regardless if we're treating, eczema like you were for me, or we're treating depression, or we're treating cardiovascular disease, something's going on, even neurological inflammation that may be leading to a mood and behavior issue, right? So that's where you've said that if we deal with innate immunity and reducing inflammation, a combination of these things with these ingredients, you kind of plug all these gaps and holes. And the worst case, you're going to live a few years longer and age a little slower, right? Especially with things like NMN in there. How much does it matter with the glutathione? I know there's a very unique ingredient you're working with, but I've heard with some people that have gone for like glutathione IVs, and they are missing copy number variation. Their GSTT, the core glutathione gene, they don't even have it. And then all of a sudden, that treatment that was supposed to help them makes them bedridden. We've seen this with a naturopath's office, where they can't, and then they give them more. They say, well, maybe it's so bad. You're detoxing right now. That's why you don't feel good. You need a little more, and that gets even worse. So, is this based on the ingredient? Is it based on genetics? Is it a combination of both?
Just going to say, you hit it on the nail on the head there. It's a combination of both, as Mansoor would teach us, or has taught us, and as you'd remember, it's the super family, right? GSTT1, GSTM1, GSTP1, and all the variations that exist within those. Creating intermediates. First of all, I do think glutathione works no matter what the format extracellularly, and there's some benefit to that, but we want it in the cell. So you're having some antioxidant function outside of the cell. Now, somebody who's given too much too quickly intravenously that also has some of these poor copy or zero, call them null, and even downstream, what's likely happening is an accumulation of extracellular intermediate. So the glutathione is helping to, detoxify some of these things the body might have excess of, but then where's it going? It's not being metabolized intracellularly and then converted to something, water soluble that we can pee out, poop out, or sweat out. And that's the problem. So, that's what's happening in those individual situations, people getting intravenous therapies in naturopathic offices. You want to tighter this stuff up as well, the stuff that does work, because just like immune function, or inflammation for that matter, you don't want all guns blazing all the time. You want to understand the individual, and you want to sometimes go up and even down in dose. There's a concept called hormesis. You've probably heard of this before. And similar to conventional medicine that can appreciate pharmacokinetics. If we really understood the individual and the drug and the studies and the P450 system, the cytochrome that we study with genomic detoxification, and LD50, which in pharmacokinetics represents the amount at 50% of the time will kill a lab animal. Hormesis is this sort of bell curve wave where too little of an ingredient, quality aside for now, too little of an ingredient does nothing to modulate or stimulate the system. Too much of an ingredient can cause serious problems and side effects, like intravenous glutathione to somebody with these variations. But the perfect amount just to cause that, stimulation. In most cases, hormesis is really the perfect amount of the thing that would ultimately, in some cases, even be toxic. Like we've spoken about this before, scorpion venom. Right, which has been studied for chlorotoxin, just the right amount to stimulate. It's in the literature. Evidence is amazing for certain brain tumors and certain forms of cancer, or for that matter, thermal exposure. So this is why we do infrared sauna, right? This is why we do cold dunks. That's hormetic. But too long in infrared sauna, you'll melt and die. Too long in an ice bath, and you'll freeze to death, right? I mean, but too little probably does nothing. You can't jump in and out of an ice bath and have some therapeutic benefit. And the same with infrared sauna. You got to do it for that right amount. That Goldilocks formula is how I often refer back to it. So, yeah. To your point, glutathione is not right for everybody, and it's also at too high of a dose in the wrong format. I really like the precursors as well. if you're blind to this, and or even if you know genomically, so these are like N-acetylcysteine, this is alpha lipoic acid, selenium. These three ingredients can often help the body make more of it if it's well equipped. And the work of Dr. Paul Merrick, to even come back just briefly to COVID, and the work that him and his team at University of Eastern Virginia School of Medicine have created for the in or outpatient COVID protocol, it includes a lot of these simple ingredients. Looking at vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, quercetin. That's an incredible bioflavonoid that has wonderful immune modulating and even inflammation lowering. It's found very high in onions and certain yellow and orange varietal fruits and vegetables, but you'll never get enough. You have to take it in supplement form to have a therapeutic benefit. And they're looking at melatonin there. They're also looking at berberine. That's another superhero, I think. Even black seed oil. These are all, again, these are immune modulators, balancing the immune system, lowering inflammation, balancing glycemic or blood sugar levels. And the outcomes, again, to your point, like this is managing the hub of what disturbs most of us. What we're finding with this self project is we're just proving what we've thought all along, which is these ingredients known to manage inflammation at the cellular level. And the fact that anyone that we're looking at within our database, most, have problems with methylation, or as you put it, the interlumen of the artery lining with the 9p21G variation. Manage inflammation at the cellular level, and you're going to be healthier.
So given that, I mean, the ingredients you put together, in your head, this all makes sense because you've been doing this for so long and you go to all the shows and you see all of what's available and what's best in class. So break down why for the stuff that you put in there, why each one? What do they do?
We're also in the middle of working this out with some incredible people. Can't talk about this entirely, but let's just say some people that have been doing this for many years at Georgia Tech University, and using AI, big data, with the help of IBM monster machines. And so not just sort of what Mansoor has taught us with genomic pathways and that what we theorized through applications of this for that, but now actually working them back through big data insofar as indications, even those that are off label. So we'll know with high certainty. This trial that we have coming up is also kind of just further proof in the pudding. So what we're doing is we're bookending anyone who wants to be involved in the self trial, CELLF.com. You can register there. We're doing urinary way downstream measures of inflammation. So a lot of literature is focused on kind of upstream. We know what the genetics are, of course, but upstream inflammation, COX-2, NF-kappa beta intracellular stuff, which is all important. But we're looking all the way downstream at something called 11-dehydrothromboxane. That's like urinary output of that level of that individual's level of inflammation, plus C-reactive protein, very high specificity, which is relevant to the cardiovascular system especially, but all other tissues. And then we wanted to capture 8-OHDG. Which is an acronym for 8-hydroxydeoxyguanosine. That's inflammation or free radical attack to the DNA. And that's so important for us because we want to understand as it pertains to what we know about genomics, but also, doing these lifetime interventions. So the individuals have this baseline urinary testing. They'll take 1 month of these ingredients that we believe, both through our experience, ours collectively, and the work of Dr. Mansoor Mohammed and the work at DNA Co. And we believe that after a month, we're going to see a significant live decline in those three biometric endpoints.
That's awesome. And it's awesome that you're taking that approach, because often you come up with something that, in fact, forget about you come up with something. You just have something that you can spin a story about, and you put a label on it and you see it being sold online. And this is what drags the industry down, because all of a sudden there's no efficacy, things don't work, and then everything gets bucketed the same. Because going back to that question of science, there's, especially in the US, there's a lot less scrutiny. It's a lot easier to just come up with a product. They don't have, like you said, the Canadian scrutiny. It's anybody can go make a supplement as long as it's manufactured under GMP. It's clean, essentially, right? So, but what you've done is you said, well, we're not going to sell this stuff until we prove it. So we're going to put, I think you have close to 1,000 people enrolled now. where it's
1,500 enrolled. Yeah. So,
okay.
whether you're selected for the trial, we want to be fair here as well, because we're not going to placebo control this. This is not an official for publication, study. We're going to do that in the future. This is efficacy market research, but we're purposely populating two pools. One in which we call the health seeker. These individuals actually have a problem that's very relevant to cellular inflammation. And something you already mentioned during the podcast, you don't have to feel bad to feel even better.
Right.
And we appreciate those individuals at the DNA company and itself. And what we're saying is, if you're a wellness seeker or a biohacker, you're somebody who's looking to go from good to better, we want you too. And we want to understand both of these pools. Certainly we won't be able to, onboard 1,500 individuals, but those that don't will have special, very special first access discounts to both testing and the finished product once we prove it out.
Cool. And in the little time that we have left here, I'm sure people are wondering, okay, it's obvious this Bryce guy knows what he's talking about. He's learned a few things along the way. When it comes to innate immunity, the person that hasn't been tested, that doesn't know their genetics, that isn't even sure if they need help or not, what are those 2 or 3 things that sort of everybody should be doing?
Again, I'm gonna defer to the work of Dr. Paul Merrick at the University of Eastern Virginia School of Medicine and his team. They're doing wonderful work there as it relates to currently. I mean, I'm giving you what we're going through with this pandemic. Those ingredients, if you look at iMask, IMASK plus, you just Google that. That's what I think everyone should do right now to help activate their innate immunity in the face of this pandemic. And so again, I'll just spit them out: vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc. I add NAC in there. I think that's something they haven't added, but NAC, or N-acetylcysteine, which is, by the way, going to be soon off the market, unfortunately, in the US, because it's both considered drug and supplement. And of course, if it's valuable to the drug world and they can profit from it, they're going to yank it off the shelves. Zinc is in there, if I hadn't already said it, and melatonin. And then black seed, black cumin oil is like the poor man's ivermectin, in my opinion. And anyone can access that. To that, I would really seriously consider this echinacea. And I mean, I'm not a brand hawker, but I have to, advise people, if they're looking for the right stuff when it comes to echinacea, it's this A. Vogel. It's a Swiss brand, very widely available health food stores and some drugstores, specialized pharmacies. A. Vogel, and it's called Echinoforce. They have all kinds of formats. By the way, this is safe in pregnant, lactating women and children. I mean, it's the level of safety, efficacy is
And when I mentioned the magic potion in the beginning, that's it. I mean, I've been using it. I have not been sick in 3 years, literally, because of your help on that product.
Anytime I feel a tickle in my throat, it's sprayed all the time. I go off label with that one, by the way, and not everyone should, but I'm spraying it 4 or 5 times the back of my throat every hour until I don't feel anything. That's how I use the product. And I'm pretty sure, I have a feeling, the manufacturer wouldn't have a problem with me saying that.
Right. Cool. And then when we look at, so what's coming out now, you're going to go through this research, a study, you're going to prove the efficacy, the product works. We're then going to prove, through people using it and getting their own results. How do we deal with this? And I only bring this up because of what you said about NAC. So yes, the FDA, I don't know, it was about a month ago, they said that NAC is now a drug. It's no longer able to be purchased as a supplement. In Canada, clinicians are being told that they may not be able to suggest vitamin C, any supplement. And in fact, I remember a petition through P3, who you mentioned, a functional medicine clinic, which is now closed, which has now become VedMed, which you're involved in, receiving an email from one of the practitioners there saying, I don't understand how this is possible. Please support this, this survey, this petition to say, how can doctors no longer prescribe vitamin C and vitamin D? So how much of a challenge is it? Is that pharma? Is that lack of information? Is it ignorance? What's going on there?
Yeah, so Codex, a big operation. This has been around since the mid 80s, or even earlier. I don't think this will ever be put through or ever succeed. First of all, when we're talking about not prescribing vitamin C, it's really not having access to certain dosages, and that would extend itself through most nutraceuticals, I'm sure if that ever happened, again, I doubt it would ever happen for so many reasons, probably outside the scope of this podcast, but it would be more of like, what's the maximum dose of vitamin C that anyone can access? And if that's 250 milligrams, then so be it. You're just downing, 20 pills at once instead of one. It's more of a dosing schedule thing. So that's Codex, alimentarius, and that's been going on for decades now, and I don't think they'll ever win it. Now, certain dualities like NAC, I actually kind of understand. This is the thing that you're going to get at the emergency room if you've overdosed on acetaminophen, because, and by the way, I should mention, it's dosed into an intravenous bag, and it's administered as the first acute care, first triage, first line therapy for acetaminophen overdosing. That just tells you the story right there of the power of natural medicine and nutraceuticals, because NAC is the precursor, one of them, to glutathione. And your body in that acute state of toxicity needs glutathione to help you express the otherwise very deadly and toxic acetaminophen overdose. Perfect example of real world use of nutraceuticals, and again, we're using lower doses. The ingredients we've chosen, though, of course, through the DNA code for our standalones and also through Self, none of them that I know of have any, other than NAC, have any potential for discontinued use. In fact, if anything, we're onboarding more and more really cool, unique, novel ingredients, and that's part of the process at Self, with GGC, or gamma glutamylcysteine, for detoxification, or for that matter, the Euthyver NMN ingredient. That a lot of folks, it's hard to access otherwise. So this will be novel, proven, safe, effective, and access to the average individual.
That's awesome. So Bryce, I mean, we could go on for another 2 hours, because we just hit the tip of the iceberg in terms of knowledge and what you could tell us about. But first of all, I would urge anyone that's interested in understanding their immunity and their inflammatory load and dealing with it, enroll yourself in the Self trial. So CELLF.com, right? You can learn where you're at, how, and that delta value between where you started and where you got to will give you a real sort of reality check of what work was needed, right? And the other thing is, if you want to get personalized and you want to understand not just, hey, it's my immune system, but there's so much more going on that you could know. Are you okay if people contact you at VetMed and reach out to you to work with you?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. We're accepting new patients there. Our team is incredible. Dr. Elliot Jacobson heads up the medical side, medical doctor, XER. We're talking about the emergency room a second ago. Sam Gibbs, osteopathic manual practitioner. Dr. Dan Damian. We're heavily focused there on neuroregeneration. I mean, I take a special interest in immune function, and I work alongside with Dr. Jacobson, but we have an amazing team that's looking at neuro rehab, which this is post-concussive therapies. By the way, whether it's physical or chemical, so neuro rehabs are focused, and anyone can contact us through info@venmed.com, and that's double N as in Nancy, so info@V like Victor ENN med.com.
Awesome. Thanks, Bryce. This was enlightening. I'm sure everyone's going to change a few things, make some tweaks, and get a little better. So thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Cash. Appreciate it so much.